At the Mother's Day dinner, my daughter said, "Let's toast to the real mother of the house," and hugged her mother-in-law. My son smiled. The next day, they received an official notice. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I spent 3 days preparing for Mother's Day dinner. At 64, I still believe that if I just tried hard enough, cooked well enough, loved deeply enough, my children would see me the way I desperately needed them to see me. I was wrong. The dining room table gleamed under the chandelier my late husband Robert had surprised me with 30 years ago. I'd polished every surface until it sparkled, arranged fresh peonies in crystal vases, and set out the good china we only used for special occasions. The roast was perfectly golden, the potatoes creamy, the green beans still crisp. Everything had to be perfect because maybe, just maybe, this would be the day my family remembered I existed. Marcus arrived first with Aurora, his wife of 3 years. She glided into my home wearing a flowing floral dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders like something from a magazine. She was 28, the same age as my daughter Jessica, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Bonnie," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks, "everything smells absolutely divine. You've outdone yourself again." Her words were honey, but something about the way she said my name, not Mom or even Mother Bonnie like she used to, made my chest tighten. I forced a smile and hugged Marcus, my firstborn, my boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and bad dreams. He barely squeezed back. "Hey Mom," he said absently, already looking around the room. "Where should Aurora sit?" Before I could answer, Aurora had claimed the chair at the head of the table. My chair. The one where I'd sat for every family dinner, every holiday, every celebration for the past 20 years since Robert died. I opened my mouth to say something, then closed it. It was just a chair, I told myself. What mattered was that we were all together. Jessica arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and apologetic, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd always been my sensitive child, the one who felt everything too deeply, who needed constant reassurance that she was loved and valued. Now 32 and still searching for her place in the world, she looked to Aurora with something that twisted my stomach: admiration. "Sorry I'm late," Jessica said, barely glancing at me before rushing to embrace Aurora. Traffic was insane and I had to stop for wine. She handed Aurora an expensive bottle of Merlot, the kind I would never splurge on for myself. I noticed she hadn't brought anything for me, hadn't even acknowledged the hours I'd spent cooking her favorite dishes. We sat down to eat, and I watched my family navigate around me like I was furniture. Marcus discussed his promotion at the marketing firm with Aurora, who offered insights and suggestions as if she were his business partner rather than his wife. Jessica hung on every word Aurora spoke, nodding eagerly when she mentioned the yoga retreat she was planning or the book club she'd started. I tried to join the conversations, mentioning the garden I'd been working on or the volunteer work I'd picked up at the library. The responses were polite but distant, quick nods before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. I felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller in my own dining room. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jessica stood up, wine glass in hand, her cheeks flushed from the Merlot. "I want to make a toast," she announced, swaying slightly on her feet. My heart lifted. Finally, I thought. Finally, someone was going to acknowledge the work I'd put into this dinner. The love I'd poured into raising them, the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother after losing Robert. "To Aurora," Jessica continued, raising her glass high. "Let's toast to the real mother of this house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs as Jessica wrapped her arms around Aurora, who accepted the embrace with a gracious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Marcus raised his glass, beaming at his wife with pride that used to be reserved for me. I sat frozen, my own glass halfway to my lips, watching my daughter celebrate another woman as the mother of the house I had built, the family I had raised, the home where I had loved and sacrificed and given everything I had. The roast turned to ash in my mouth. The beautiful table settings blurred through tears I refused to let fall. "To Aurora," Marcus echoed, clinking his glass against his sister's. They all drank. All except me. Nobody seemed to notice my silence. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody saw the way my hands trembled as I set down my untouched wine glass. As they laughed and chatted, planning Aurora's upcoming birthday party and discussing vacation ideas I wasn't invited to share. I made a decision. I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed to check on dessert, and stood with my back against the counter, finally allowing the tears to come. 34 years of motherhood, 20 years of single parenthood, a lifetime of putting my children first, and this was how it ended. Not with gratitude or recognition or love, but with someone else being crowned in my place while I served dinner in my own home. I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and returned to the table with a forced smile and store-bought apple pie I claimed was homemade. The evening continued around me, but something inside me had shifted. Something had broken that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something else had been born in that moment of humiliation. A quiet, burning determination that would soon change everything. The morning after the dinner, I found myself standing in Marcus's old bedroom, now Aurora's art studio, staring at the walls that used to be covered with his baseball trophies and honor roll certificates. She'd painted them a soft lavender and hung abstract paintings that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. His childhood had been erased as thoroughly as my role as his mother. I shouldn't have been surprised. The signs had been there for 3 years, ever since Marcus brought Aurora home for the first time. She'd been so sweet then, so interested in our family stories, so eager to learn my recipes and hear about Marcus as a little boy. I'd been charmed by her attention, grateful that my son had found someone who seemed to value family as much as I did. How naive I'd been. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Aurora was too clever for that. Instead, it came in tiny increments, small changes that seemed reasonable when viewed individually but created a devastating pattern when viewed together. First, she'd suggested that Sunday dinners might be more convenient at their apartment since it was closer to Jessica's new job. When I protested that I enjoyed cooking for everyone, Aurora assured me I'd still be invited, of course, but wouldn't it be nice to be a guest for once instead of doing all the work? Those Sunday dinners quickly became intimate gatherings where Aurora showcased her culinary skills while I sat awkwardly on the sidelines, complimenting dishes that tasted like they came from expensive restaurants. Jessica raved about Aurora's creativity, how she made everything look so effortless and elegant. I started feeling like an intrusion at my own family tradition. Then came the gradual editing of family stories. When Aurora told people about Marcus's childhood, she somehow managed to make his achievements sound like they happened in spite of my parenting rather than because of it. She'd laugh and say things like, "Can you imagine poor Marcus trying to play baseball with those hand-me-down cleats Bonnie found at garage sales?" Everyone would chuckle, and I'd feel compelled to explain that money was tight after Robert died, that I did the best I could. "Of course you did, Bonnie," Aurora would say with that understanding smile. "Single mothers have to make such difficult choices." She made it sound like I deliberately disadvantaged my children instead of working 2 jobs to keep them fed and housed and loved. Jessica fell under Aurora's influence like a moth drawn to flame. My daughter had always struggled with confidence, always needed validation, and Aurora provided it in abundance. She praised Jessica's job at the nonprofit, her apartment decorating, her choice in clothes. She made Jessica feel sophisticated and worldly in ways I apparently never had. I watched my daughter transform under Aurora's guidance, becoming more polished but also more distant from me. Jessica started making subtle comments about my old-fashioned way of doing things, suggesting I might enjoy activities more appropriate for someone my age. When I mentioned feeling lonely, she'd say I needed to make friends with other widows instead of depending on my children for companionship. The most painful part was watching Marcus change. My son, who used to call me twice a week just to chat, who used to ask my advice about everything from job decisions to what gift to buy his girlfriend, gradually stopped including me in his life. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, eager to leave. Aurora had positioned herself as his primary confidant, the one he turned to for advice and emotional support. She was younger, more sophisticated, more in tune with his professional world. I was just his aging mother, a reminder of a simpler time he'd apparently outgrown. The shift accelerated after they got married. Suddenly, every conversation included references to we and our decisions, with Aurora clearly being the dominant voice in that partnership. When I suggested family traditions we'd always observed, Marcus would defer to Aurora's preferences. When I offered to help with anything, they had it handled. When I tried to maintain the close relationship we'd always had, I was gently but firmly redirected. "Mom," Marcus had said during one particularly painful conversation 6 months ago, "Aurora thinks it might be healthier if you gave us a little more space to build our marriage. She says you're having trouble letting go, and honestly, she might have a point." The words had devastated me, but what hurt worse was that they came from my son, not his wife. Aurora had never had to be the bad guy. She'd simply influenced him until he believed her perspective was his own. Looking back, I could see how masterfully she'd orchestrated my exile. She'd never been openly hostile or disrespectful. She'd never forbidden Marcus from seeing me or speaking to me. She'd simply created an environment where including me became awkward, where my presence felt like an intrusion, where my children gradually began to see me through her eyes, as a needy aging woman who couldn't accept that her job as a mother was finished. The cruelest part was that she'd made it seem like it was for my own good. When I expressed hurt or confusion about my changing role in the family, Aurora would gently suggest that I needed to develop my own interests, make my own friends, stop defining myself through my children. She made my natural desire to remain close to the family I'd raised sound pathological. And now, after 3 years of this slow erosion, she'd claimed the ultimate prize. She wasn't just Marcus's wife or Jessica's sister-in-law anymore. She was the matriarch, the real mother, the center of the family I'd spent my life building. Standing in what used to be my son's room, I felt the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just their respect or attention or time, but something far more fundamental: my identity. For 34 years, being a mother had been the core of who I was. Every decision I'd made, every sacrifice I'd offered, every dream I'd deferred had been in service of raising my children. Aurora had taken that away from me, and she'd made my own children complicit in the theft. But as I stood there among her paintings and pottery supplies, surrounded by the evidence of how completely she'd erased me from this space, I felt something crystallizing inside me. It wasn't rage exactly, though there was anger there. It wasn't just hurt, though the pain was overwhelming. It was clarity. For 3 years I'd been playing defense, trying to hold on to scraps of the relationship I'd once had with my children. I'd been reactive, apologetic, desperate. I'd let Aurora set the terms of engagement and then wondered why I kept losing ground. But that was about to change. Aurora had taught me something valuable, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd shown me that love alone wasn't enough. That being right wasn't enough. That good intentions and pure motives were no match for strategy and manipulation. She'd also made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. 2 weeks after the Mother's Day disaster, Marcus called me. Not a casual check-in call like we used to have, but one of those formal conversations that started with, "Mom, do you have a minute to talk about something important?" I was in my garden, pulling weeds from the rose bed Robert had planted for me 25 years ago. The thorns had scratched my hands, leaving tiny drops of blood on my fingertips, but I kept working. Physical pain was easier to manage than the emotional kind that had become my constant companion. "Of course, honey," I said, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "What's on your mind?" There was a pause, the kind that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Aurora and I have been talking, and we've found this amazing house. It's everything we've ever dreamed of, Mom. For bedrooms, a huge kitchen. A yard where we can finally have the garden Aurora's always wanted." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. "That sounds wonderful, Marcus. I'm so happy for you both. The thing is," he continued, his voice taking on that careful tone I'd come to recognize as Aurora's influence, "we're a little short on the down payment. The market is so competitive right now, and we need to move fast if we want this place." I waited, knowing what was coming but hoping I was wrong. "We were wondering if you might consider helping us out. Just temporarily, of course. We'd pay you back as soon as we get settled and Aurora's art starts selling better." The request shouldn't have surprised me. Over the past 3 years there had been other requests. Help with Aurora's art supplies when she decided to pursue painting professionally. Money for Marcus's MBA program that he'd started but never finished. Contributions to their elaborate wedding that had left me eating cereal for dinner most nights that month. Each time they presented it as an investment in their future. A temporary loan that would be repaid once their circumstances improved. Each time repayment had been delayed, then forgotten, then somehow transformed into something I should have been happy to provide as a loving mother. How much are you thinking? I asked, though I already suspected the answer would be more than I could easily afford. Well, that's the thing. The down payment is pretty substantial and we'd need it all at once. We were hoping you might consider using the house as collateral. You know, like a home equity loan, but between family. My hands went cold. You want me to put my house up as collateral? Not put it up exactly. More like transfer it temporarily so we can use the equity. Aurora found this lawyer who says it's really simple, and of course we transfer it back once we get the mortgage figured out. It's just paperwork, Mom. We'd never actually take your house. I sat down hard on my garden bench, the phone suddenly feeling heavy in my hand. They weren't asking for money anymore. They were asking for my home, the house Robert and I had bought when Marcus was 2 years old, the place where I'd raised my children, where every room held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet evenings reading bedtime stories. Marcus, I don't know about this. The house is all I really have left. Mom, you're being dramatic. It's not like we're taking it away from you. You'd still live there, still own it in every way that matters. It's just a legal technicality to help us get the loan we need. But I could hear Aurora's voice in the background, a soft murmur that I couldn't make out, but somehow knew was guiding the conversation. Marcus had never been manipulative like this before she came along. He'd been direct, honest, sometimes impulsive but never calculating. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. But Mom, the deadline is pretty tight. The sellers are looking at other offers, and we really need to move on this by Friday. Friday. 3 days away. Just enough time to make me feel rushed but not enough to really think it through or talk to anyone else about it. That evening Jessica called. I was surprised to hear from her since she'd been distant since the Mother's Day dinner, communicating mainly through brief text messages and polite but hurried phone calls. Mom, Marcus told me about the house situation, she said without preamble. I think it's really wonderful that you're willing to help them like this. I haven't agreed to anything yet, Jessica. But you will, right? I mean, this is their dream house, Mom. Aurora showed me pictures and it's absolutely gorgeous. They'll never get another opportunity like this. I felt trapped between my children, both of them presenting this request as if my agreement was inevitable, as if saying no would make me selfish and cruel. Jessica, it's a big decision. I'm not sure I'm comfortable using my house as collateral for someone else's loan. Someone else? Jessica's voice rose with indignation. Mom, this is Marcus we're talking about. Your son. And Aurora's family now too. Besides, it's not like you need all that space anymore. Maybe this could be good for everyone. There it was, the suggestion I'd been dreading. What do you mean by that? Well, you're always saying you're lonely in that big house. And Aurora mentioned that once they get settled, they'd love to have you spend more time with them. You could practically be neighbors, and they'd have room for you to visit whenever you wanted. The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about a down payment. This was about Aurora getting exactly what she wanted. My house, my children's loyalty, and me relegated to the role of grateful grandmother, dependent on their generosity for visits and inclusion. Jessica, that house is my home. It's where I raised you and Marcus, where your father and I built our life together. Mom, you're being sentimental. Dad's been gone for 20 years. Don't you think it's time to let go of the past and focus on helping your children build their future? The words stung because they echoed conversations I'd had with myself during long, lonely evenings. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly. Maybe I was being selfish, keeping a house that was too big for one person, while my children struggled to get started in life. But something about the coordinated nature of their appeals made me suspicious. The timing, the shared talking points, the way they both presented this as obvious and inevitable. This felt less like a family helping each other, and more like a campaign designed to separate me from my home. I need more time to think about this, I said. Mom, you can't keep putting this off. Marcus said the deadline is Friday. If you wait too long, they'll lose the house and it'll be your fault. My fault. Just like my loneliness was my fault for not making friends my own age. Just like feeling excluded was my fault for not accepting that my children had grown up. Just like losing my place in the family was my fault for not adapting to Aurora's vision of how things should be. After Jessica hung up, I sat in Robert's old recliner, looking around the living room where we'd spent so many evenings together. The walls were covered with family photos. Marcus's little league team, Jessica's high school graduation, Christmas mornings with presents scattered under the tree, birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments that had made up the fabric of our lives. Aurora was right about one thing. I was holding on to the past. But maybe the past was all I had left. The next morning I found myself at the lawyer's office Aurora had recommended, signing papers I didn't fully understand while Marcus and Aurora beamed at me with gratitude that felt more like relief. "You're the best, Mom," Marcus said, squeezing my shoulder. "This means everything to us." Aurora hugged me tightly, her perfume overwhelming in the small office. "Bonnie, you're such a generous soul. We're so lucky to have you in our lives." As I signed my name on the final document, transferring my home into Marcus's name as collateral for their dream house, I told myself I was doing what any loving mother would do. I was investing in my children's future, helping them achieve their dreams, proving that family came first. But deep in my stomach, a cold knot of dread was forming. I had just handed them the keys to everything I had left. The paperwork was barely dry when everything changed. 3 days after I'd signed over my house to help Marcus and Aurora with their down payment, Marcus called again. But this time there was no warmth in his voice, no gratitude. Just the cold efficiency of someone delivering bad news he wanted to get over with quickly. "Mom, Aurora and I need to talk to you about something." I was making lunch, a simple tuna sandwich that would serve as both my midday meal and probably dinner too, since I'd been cutting expenses everywhere possible after emptying my savings account to help with their closing costs. "What is it, honey?" "Well, we've been talking about the living situation, and we think it might be best if you gave us some space while we settle into married life." The sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. "Space? What kind of space?" "Aurora feels like having you in the house is making it hard for her to feel like it's really her home. You know? She wants to redecorate, make it reflect our style as a couple. But she's worried about offending you by changing things." I set down my sandwich, my appetite completely gone. "Marcus, it's my house. I'm the one paying the mortgage." "Actually, Mom, that's not exactly true anymore. Remember? We restructured everything when you helped us with the down payment. Legally, the house is in my name now, and Aurora and I are making the mortgage payments." The words hit me like ice water. "What are you talking about? I never agreed to give up my house." "Mom, you signed the papers. Aurora's lawyer explained everything. You transferred ownership to me as part of the collateral arrangement. The mortgage payments are coming out of our account now." My hands started shaking. This wasn't what we discussed. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't helping them with a down payment on their own house. "Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I thought I was helping you buy a different house, not giving you mine." "Mom, this is the house we wanted. Aurora fell in love with it the first time I brought her home. She's been dreaming of making it our own ever since we got married." The realization crashed over me like a wave. There had never been another house. There had never been a dream home they were trying to buy. Aurora had wanted my house all along, and they'd manipulated me into handing it over. "Where am I supposed to live, Marcus?" There was a pause, and I could hear Aurora's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Aurora found you a really nice place. It's a senior community about 20 minutes from here, and they have all sorts of activities and programs. You'll make friends your own age, maybe take up some hobbies. It could be really good for you, Mom." A senior community. They were shipping me off to a retirement home like I was some burden they needed to dispose of. "Marcus, I'm 64 years old. I'm not ready for a nursing home." "It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's independent living." Aurora showed me the brochures and it looks really nice. They have a pool and a library and organized trips to museums and things. "I don't want organized trips. I want my home. I want my garden. I want my life." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Aurora's really upset about the whole situation. She feels terrible that you're not happy, but she needs to feel comfortable in her own home. Her own home. The home I'd lived in for 32 years, where I'd raised my children, where my husband had died in my arms, where every corner held memories they were now erasing. "When do you need me to leave?" "Well, that's the other thing. Aurora's already put down a deposit on the apartment for you. She was worried about waiting lists and wanted to make sure you got a good place. You can move in next weekend." Next weekend. 7 days to pack up 32 years of memories and relocate to a place I'd never seen. chosen by a woman who was systematically destroying my life. And if I say no? The silence stretched long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Marcus spoke, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Mom, this is what's best for everyone. Aurora and I need space to build our marriage, and you need to start building an independent life that doesn't revolve around your children. What about Jessica? What does she think about this? Jessica agrees with us. She thinks it's time for you to focus on yourself instead of trying to control our lives. Control their lives. That's what they thought I'd been doing. By loving them, by wanting to remain close to them, by hoping to be included in the families they were building. I'd been controlling them. After Marcus hung up, I sat in my kitchen, in the house that was no longer mine, and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 1 week, I'd lost my home, my savings, and apparently my children's respect. I'd been outmaneuvered so completely that I was still trying to understand how it had happened. The worst part was the realization that this had been planned all along. Aurora had never wanted another house. She'd wanted mine. And she'd manipulated my son into helping her steal it from me, while making me grateful for the opportunity. I walked through the rooms that had been my world for 3 decades, looking at everything I'd have to leave behind. The kitchen where I'd taught Jessica to bake cookies. The living room where Marcus had built blanket forts on rainy afternoons. The master bedroom where Robert and I had whispered our dreams for our children's futures. In Jessica's old room, I found a box of photo albums I'd been meaning to organize. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, school plays and baseball games, quiet family dinners and loud holiday celebrations. Evidence of a life that had apparently meant nothing to the people I'd lived it for. My phone rang, and for a moment hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Marcus had realized what he was doing. Maybe he'd called to apologize, to tell me this had all been Aurora's idea and he wanted to make it right. But it was Jessica. Mom, Marcus told me about the move. I think it's going to be great for you. Aurora picked out such a nice place, and you'll be so much happier there. Jessica, they're taking my home away from me. Mom, you're being dramatic. Nobody's taking anything away. You're getting a fresh start. A chance to build a life that's about you instead of constantly worrying about what Marcus and Aurora need. I raised you in this house, Jessica. I changed your diapers in the nursery upstairs. I stayed up all night when you had pneumonia in the bedroom that Aurora is now calling hers. Mom, that was a long time ago. You can't live in the past forever. It's not the past, Jessica. It's my life. It's my home. And your brother just stole it from me. Nobody stole anything. You gave it to them willingly. And honestly, Mom, maybe it's time you stopped playing the victim and started taking responsibility for your own happiness. After she hung up, I sat alone in my house that was no longer mine, surrounded by a lifetime of memories that my children had decided were worthless. The people I'd sacrificed everything for had just told me that everything I'd given meant nothing, that I meant nothing, that my happiness was my own responsibility, while theirs was somehow mine to provide. 7 days. I had 7 days to figure out how to rebuild a life that had just been demolished by the people who were supposed to love me most. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something began to shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and overwhelming, but underneath it something else was growing. Something that felt like anger. Something that felt like resolve. Something that felt like the beginning of a plan. The Sunset Gardens senior living community was exactly as depressing as it sounded. Beige walls, industrial carpeting, and the lingering smell of disinfectant mixed with whatever they were serving in the dining hall. My new apartment was a studio with a kitchenette, a fold-out bed, and a view of the parking lot where Aurora had dropped me off 3 weeks ago with 2 suitcases and a promise to visit soon. She hadn't visited. Neither had Marcus or Jessica. I sat at the small table by the window, staring at a stack of unpaid bills that had been forwarded from my old address. My old house. The mortgage payment alone was more than my entire Social Security check, and I had no idea how Marcus and Aurora were managing it on his marketing salary, and her non-existent income from selling abstract paintings to tourists. That's when Mrs. Patterson from down the hall knocked on my door. Eleanor Patterson was 82, sharp as a tack, and had been watching me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize when something didn't add up. "Bonnie dear," she said, settling into my only other chair with the confidence of someone who'd invited herself, "I've been thinking about your situation. I looked up from the bills, grateful for any distraction from my financial reality. What situation? The one where your son legally owns your house but can't afford the payments. Your daughter thinks you're better off in this beige prison. And you're sitting here like a woman who's been had. Her directness was startling. For 3 weeks, I'd been surrounded by staff members who spoke in soothing tones about transitions and new beginnings, treating me like I was fragile and confused rather than angry and betrayed. Eleanor, it's complicated. Honey, I've been married 3 times and buried 2 husbands. Nothing is that complicated. She leaned forward, her watery blue eyes surprisingly fierce. Tell me exactly what happened with those papers you signed. So I did. I told her about the Mother's Day dinner, about Aurora's gradual takeover of my family, about the manipulated loan arrangement that had somehow become a complete transfer of ownership. I told her about Marcus's phone call, about being shipped off here like an unwanted piece of furniture, about watching my children choose Aurora over the woman who'd raised them. Eleanor listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of disapproval. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Bonnie, how long did you say you lived in that house? 32 years. We bought it when Marcus was 2. And the deed was in your name alone after your husband died? Yes. Robert left everything to me. Eleanor stood up and walked to my small kitchenette, helping herself to a cup of coffee without asking. And this lawyer Aurora recommended. Did you use your own attorney to review the papers before you signed them? No. Aurora said her lawyer would handle everything, and it would save money to just use him for the whole transaction. Of course she did. Eleanor returned to her chair, coffee in hand. Bonnie, I think you need to talk to a real lawyer. Not Aurora's lawyer. Not some family friend, but someone who works for you and only you. The thought hadn't occurred to me. For 3 weeks, I'd been wallowing in self-pity and shock, accepting that I'd been outsmarted and outmaneuvered. It hadn't occurred to me that there might be legal remedies for what had been done to me. I can't afford a lawyer, Eleanor. I can barely afford this place. My grandson is a lawyer. He owes me about 50 favors and he specializes in elder law. Let me give him a call. 2 days later, I sat in the office of David Patterson, Eleanor's grandson, a serious man in his 40s who looked like he spent his days fighting battles for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He'd reviewed the paperwork I'd signed, and his expression grew darker with each page. Mrs. Williams, I have to ask you directly. Did you understand that you were giving up ownership of your house when you signed these documents? No. I thought I was using it as collateral to help my son buy another house. I thought it was temporary. And did anyone explain to you that by signing this quitclaim deed, you were permanently transferring ownership to your son with no legal right to remain in the property? No. Aurora's lawyer said it was just paperwork to help with the loan. David leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. Mrs. Williams, what happened to you is called elder financial abuse. It's a felony in this state. The words hit me like a physical blow. Financial abuse. My own children had committed a crime against me. But they're my children. Surely that makes a difference. Actually, it makes it worse. The penalties are more severe when the perpetrator is a family member in a position of trust. He flipped through the papers again. The good news is that there are several irregularities in these documents that might give us grounds to challenge the transfer. What kind of irregularities? For starters, the deed transfer and the mortgage arrangement were handled by the same attorney, which creates a conflict of interest. Additionally, there's no independent appraisal of the property, no waiting period for you to consider the decision, and no requirement that you seek independent legal counsel. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope? What does that mean? It means we might be able to prove that this transfer was obtained through fraud and undue influence. If we can do that, we can potentially void the transaction and restore ownership of the house to you. But as David outlined the legal process, my hope began to dim. It would take months, possibly years. It would be expensive even with his reduced fees. And most importantly, it would destroy whatever remained of my relationship with my children. Mrs. Williams, I need you to understand something. If we pursue this case and we win, your son and daughter-in-law could face criminal charges. Are you prepared for that possibility? I thought about Marcus as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees and bad dreams. I thought about the proud young man who'd graduated college, who'd called me his hero in his valedictorian speech. I thought about the son who'd chosen his manipulative wife over his mother, who'd stolen my home and shipped me off to die in a beige apartment. Mr. Patterson, 3 weeks ago I would have said no. I would have said that family was more important than money or property or being right. And now I realize that I don't have a family anymore. What I have is 2 people who share my DNA, and have decided that I'm disposable. That evening I called Marcus. I hadn't spoken to him since the move, and his voice was cautious when he answered. "Hi Mom. How are you settling in at Sunset Gardens?" "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Did you know that signing those papers meant I was giving up my house permanently?" There was a long silence. Mom, Aurora explained everything. "You said you understood." "That's not what I asked. Did you know I was giving up my house?" Another pause. "Mom, you were living in the past. That house was too big for you, too expensive to maintain. We thought this would be better for everyone." "We?" Aurora and I. And Jessica agreed. "So all 3 of you planned this? You planned to take my house and dump me in a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's a nice place where you can make friends your own age." "Marcus, I'm 64 years old. I'm not ready to be put out to pasture like some old horse." "Mom, you're being dramatic. You have everything you need there." "Everything I need?" "Marcus, I need my home. I need my family. I need to matter to someone." "You do matter, Mom. But you can't base your whole identity on being our mother." "Aurora says it's unhealthy." "Aurora says." I felt the words like acid on my tongue. "Marcus, do you even have your own thoughts anymore? Or do they all come from your wife?" "That's not fair, Mom. What's not fair is stealing your mother's house. What's not fair is abandoning the woman who raised you. What's not fair is choosing a manipulative woman over your own family." "Aurora is my family now, Mom. She's my wife. And if you can't respect that, then maybe it's better if we don't talk for a while." The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone in the gathering darkness of my tiny apartment. My son had just chosen his wife over his mother, and he'd done it without a trace of guilt or regret. But for the first time in months I wasn't sad. I was angry. And anger, I was discovering, was a much more useful emotion than grief. The next morning I called David Patterson. "I've made my decision," I told him. "I want my house back. I want justice. And I don't care what it costs me in terms of my relationship with my children." "Are you sure, Mrs. Williams?" I looked around my beige prison, at the life of quiet desperation they'd consigned me to, at the future of loneliness and irrelevance they'd planned for me. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. 6 months. That's how long it took for David Patterson to build our case and for me to discover just how thoroughly I'd been underestimated. During those months, I learned things about my children that shattered what remained of my illusions. Through the legal discovery process, we found out that Marcus had been planning to sell my house from the moment Aurora suggested the loan arrangement. They'd already contacted real estate agents, gotten market evaluations, and discussed moving to Aurora's hometown in Colorado with the profits. I wasn't just being discarded, I was being sold. But Aurora had made one critical error in her grand scheme. The same meticulous nature that had allowed her to manipulate my family so effectively had led her to document everything. Text messages to her sister bragging about how easily she'd handled the old lady. Emails to real estate agents asking about the best time to list the property. Browser searches on her laptop about how to get rid of elderly parents legally. David presented it all to me in his office on a gray Tuesday morning, spreading the evidence across his conference table like pieces of a puzzle that finally revealed the complete picture. "Mrs. Williams, I've been practicing elder law for 15 years. And I've rarely seen such a clear-cut case of financial abuse and fraud. They documented their intent to defraud you in writing." I picked up a printed email from Aurora to her sister. "Bonnie is so pathetically grateful for any attention from Marcus that she'll sign anything I put in front of her. The old fool actually thanked me for helping her contribute to her son's future. By Christmas, we'll be in Colorado with $500,000 from selling her precious house." Reading those words, written by the woman my son had chosen over me, felt like swallowing broken glass. But it also crystallized something inside me that had been building for months. What are our chances of getting the house back? With this evidence, I'd say 95%. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges as well. Criminal charges. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I'd have to decide whether to cross. What would that mean? Your son and daughter-in-law could face felony charges for elder abuse and fraud. They could go to prison. They'd certainly face significant fines and restitution requirements. I thought about Marcus as a little boy, about all the dreams I'd had for his future. None of them had involved prison. But then I thought about the Mother's Day dinner, about the calculated cruelty of Aurora's toast, about the way they discarded me like yesterday's newspaper once they'd gotten what they wanted. Let me think about it. But I didn't have to think for long. 3 days later, Marcus called me for the first time since our last conversation. Mom, I think we need to talk. Aurora says her lawyer heard you're causing some kind of legal trouble. I'm not causing trouble, Marcus. I'm correcting an injustice. Mom, what you're doing could hurt a lot of people. Aurora's really upset. She's been crying for days thinking about how this might affect our future. Your future? What about my past, Marcus? What about the 34 years I spent raising you? What about the house your father and I bought to give you and Jessica a stable home? Mom, we've been over this. That house was too much for you to handle alone. That wasn't your decision to make, Marcus. Look, maybe we can work something out. Aurora thinks maybe we could arrange for you to move back in like a guest room situation, until we figure out a more permanent solution. A guest room situation? In my own house? As if I were a charity case they might graciously accommodate. Marcus, let me ask you something. Do you love me? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Then why did you steal my house? I didn't steal anything. You gave it to us. I was tricked into giving it to you. There's a difference. Mom, nobody tricked you. Aurora's lawyer explained everything clearly. You signed the papers voluntarily. And there it was. Even confronted with the truth, even caught in their scheme, Marcus was still defending Aurora, still choosing her version of reality over the evidence of her cruelty. Marcus, I want you to know something. I still love you. I will always love you because you're my son. But I don't like you very much right now. Mom, please don't do this. Whatever legal action you're thinking about taking, it's not too late to stop it. We can work this out as a family. We stopped being a family the day you chose Aurora over me, Marcus. Everything since then has just been paperwork. I hung up and immediately called David Patterson. I've made my decision about the criminal charges, I told him. And file them. All of them. The process that followed was surreal. Police officers interviewed me in David's conference room, their notebooks filling with details about my own children's crimes against me. A detective explained that financial elder abuse was taken very seriously in our state, especially when the perpetrators were family members. Marcus and Aurora were arrested on a Thursday morning. Jessica called me that afternoon hysterical. Mom, how could you do this to your own son? He's in jail because of you. He's in jail because of what he did, Jessica. You're destroying this family over money and property. Is that really what Dad would have wanted? The mention of Robert was a low blow, but I'd moved beyond being hurt by Jessica's manipulations. Your father would have wanted his children to take care of their mother, not steal from her. Nobody stole from you. You gave them that house. Jessica, I have emails from Aurora bragging about how easily she tricked me. I have text messages where she calls me pathetic and talks about how grateful she is that I'm so stupid. Your brother married a woman who despises me, and you helped her destroy my life. There was silence on the other end of the line. Jessica, you have a choice to make. You can continue to support Aurora and Marcus in what they did to me, or you can start acting like my daughter instead of her accomplice. Mom, they're family. So am I. The legal resolution came faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and elder abuse, Aurora's attorney advised her to accept a plea bargain. Marcus's attorney did the same. They would avoid prison time in exchange for pleading guilty to felony fraud, paying substantial fines, and most importantly, returning ownership of my house immediately. On the day I moved back into my home, Eleanor Patterson came with me, bringing a bottle of champagne and her characteristic bluntness. So Bonnie, how does it feel to win? I stood in my living room, surrounded by the familiar furniture and photographs that Marcus and Aurora had relegated to the basement. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, but somehow different. I was different. It doesn't feel like winning, Eleanor. It feels like surviving. Sometimes that's the same thing. Marcus and Aurora moved to Colorado as planned, but with their savings drained by legal fees and fines instead of profits from selling my house. Jessica maintained sporadic contact, sending awkward text messages on holidays, but never addressing what had happened or acknowledging her role in it. I didn't mind the distance. I'd learned something important during those months of legal battle. I didn't need their love anymore. I'd spent decades believing that being a good mother meant accepting whatever treatment my children gave me, forgiving any betrayal, sacrificing everything for their happiness. But love without respect isn't love. It's exploitation. 6 months after moving back into my house, I was working in Robert's rose garden when the doorbell rang. I found a young woman on my porch, nervous and heavily pregnant. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Sarah, Marcus's ex-girlfriend from college. I heard about what happened with Aurora and the house situation." I remembered Sarah. Marcus had dated her for 3 years and I'd always liked her. She'd been kind, genuine, interested in our family stories. Then Aurora had come along, and Sarah had quietly disappeared from Marcus's life. "Sarah, what can I do for you? I wanted you to know that Marcus called me last week. He's not happy with Aurora, and I think he's starting to see what she really is. He asked about you, wanted to know if I thought you'd ever forgive him." I looked at this young woman, so sincere and hopeful, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Compassion without obligation. "Sarah, I hope Marcus finds happiness. I hope he learns from what happened and becomes a better person. But I don't need his forgiveness or his regret to live my life. He's still your son, Mrs. Williams." "Yes, he is. But I'm not his mother anymore. I'm just a woman who used to be his mother, and that's enough for me now." After Sarah left, I returned to the rose garden, to the beautiful thorny plants that bloomed despite neglect, that survived harsh winters and came back stronger each spring. Robert had planted them for me 30 years ago, and they were still here, still blooming, still beautiful. Just like me. At 65, I was learning to live for myself instead of through my children. I was discovering interests and friendships I'd never had time for when I was constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I was finding peace in solitude instead of desperately seeking validation from people who had proven they didn't value me. Marcus and Jessica had taught me something valuable, even if they hadn't meant to. They'd show me the difference between being loved and being used, between being cherished and being convenient. And Aurora, in her calculated cruelty, had given me the greatest gift of all. She'd freed me from the prison of unconditional maternal love. I was no longer anyone's mother, anyone's victim, anyone's fool. I was just Bonnie Williams, 65 years old, living in the house she'd earned, tending the garden she'd inherited, finally, beautifully, completely free.